Alright, what's good, yo? Welcome back. Unless it's your first time watching me, then what's the word with you? How you doing? This is the Disaster Iceberg by Murderman06. But I seen this one on Reddit and I was like, yo, this thing is actually kind of crazy. I definitely want to try to break this shit down. See what I can do. You know what I mean? I don't know. I ain't perfect, cuz, but hey, we trying anyway. So we're gonna get into this. This is gonna be the first half of it. So this is gonna be tiers 1, 2, and 3. And then the next part of this is going to be tiers 4, 5, and 6, like the bottom tier, you know what I mean? So, alright, so up first is the Black Death, more commonly known as the bubonic plague. So basically the bubonic plague, it was a pandemic occurring in Afro-Eurasia from 1346 to 1353. It is considered the most fatal pandemic recorded in all of human history, causing the death of 75 to 200 million people. Bro, that's crazy. Like, think about them numbers, bro. People were freaking out because COVID, which is also on this, only had 6.14 million deaths. Like, don't get me wrong, that's a fucking lot, but bro, we're talking about 75 to 200 million people, cuz like, yo, that's a lot, bro. That is crazy. The bubonic plague is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It's spread around by fleas, and basically the more common way that people think that it spread throughout the world and Europe and everything like that was it was on these fleas that attached themselves to these black rats that would jump on all of these different ships, and basically the ships would head through the Mediterranean all the way to Africa, and they would go through Italy and go through that whole peninsula, and basically they would just spread. And from the fleas, it also took a second form where it went from human to human, and yeah, it just started popping off, man. It started going crazy. The origin of the Black Death is disputed. The pandemic originated in either Central Asia or East Asia, but its first definitive appearance was in Crimea in 1347. From Crimea, it was most likely carried by fleas living on the black rats traveled on Genoese ships, spreading through the Mediterranean basin and reaching Africa, Western Asia, and the rest of Europe via Constantinople, Sicily, and the Italian peninsula. Alright, the Black Death was the second great natural disaster to strike the European whole continent. The first one being the Great Famine of 1315 and 1357. The plague might have reduced the world population from 475 million to between 350 and 375 million. In the 14th century, there were further outbreaks throughout the late Middle Ages, and with other contributing factors, the European population did not regain its level in 1300 until 1500, and outbreaks of the plague reoccurred around the world until the early 19th century, when we finally found like vaccines and shit like that. So pretty crazy, the bubonic plague. I'm sure that's something that everybody's heard about in school. Next up is COVID-19. Actually, like I said, I'm not even really gonna cover this because, bro, we still going through it. Other than that, I'm just gonna give like the quick little thing. As of yesterday, which was April 3rd, there was recorded 488 million cases worldwide and 6.14 million deaths. So hey, you know what I mean? I know we all heard too much about COVID, so I ain't finna sit on this one for long. But anyways, we moving on to the next one. Next one, another one I feel like everybody has probably heard of, the RMS Titanic disaster, or just the Titanic. Basically, if you haven't heard about the Titanic, just go watch the movie, bro. Like, I don't know. I'm not really gonna get all into it. If you really want to learn about the Titanic, I'm gonna link Wendigoon's video, his Titanic theory video, where he goes into the fact that a lot of people think that the Titanic was actually switched with another ship, and I don't want to say it was allegedly crashed on purpose, basically to cover for insurance losses and stuff like that. So I'm gonna link that below instead of actually going into this one, to be honest. My bad about that, but I just feel like he did such a good job that I ain't even gonna do it justice, to be real with you. So we're on to the next one. It's Chernobyl disaster. All right, Chernobyl, another thing that everybody's kind of heard of at this point. But basically, the Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Near the city of Pripyat in the north of the Ukrainian SSR and the Soviet Union, it is considered the worst nuclear disaster in history, both in cost and casualties. It is one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents rated at a 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. Anyways, the initial emergency response together with the late decontamination of the event involved more than 500,000 personnel and the cost of an estimated 18 billion Soviet rubles. All right, roughly around 68 billion in USD in 2019. All right, you gotta adjust it for the inflation and everything like that.
Using the CPI to measure the average change in prices over time using a periodically updated market basket of goods and services, $68 billion in 2019 is now worth $72,868,830,660.93 in 2022. Fundamentally a 5.98357% inflation, with a $4,068,830,661 difference.
The accident occurred during a safety test on the steam turbine of an RBMK type nuclear reactor. During the planned decrease of the reactor power in preparation for the test, the power output unexpectedly dropped to near zero. The operators were unable to restore the power levels specified by the test program. Upon test completion, the operation triggered a reactor shutdown. However, a combination of operator negligence and critical design flaw had made the reactor primed to explode. Instead of shutting down, an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction event occurred, releasing enormous amounts of energy and basically blew the whole thing up, created the elephant foot, did a bunch of shit, man. Displaced a ton of people from that whole area. It's still going. Pretty crazy. Again, I'm sure Chernobyl is something that most people have heard about at this point, so all right, so finishing up the first tier is the September 11th attacks. So the September 11th attacks, more commonly known as 9/11, was a series of 4 coordinated terrorist suicide attacks by Al-Qaeda on the United States on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. All right. Throughout that morning, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners mid-flight while traveling from the northeastern U.S. to California. The attackers were organized into 3 groups of 5 members and 1 group of 4, with each group having 1 designated flight-trained member who took control over the aircraft. Their explicit goal was to crash each plane into a prominent American building, causing mass casualties and partial or complete destruction of the targeted buildings. The hijackers successfully crashed the first of 2 planes into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, and the 3rd plane into the west side of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The 4th plane was intended to hit a federal government building in Washington, D.C., but instead crashed down in a rural Pennsylvania field following a passenger revolt that foiled the attack. Basically, the attacks resulted in 2,977 fatalities, over 25,000 injuries, and substantial long-term health consequences. In addition to at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage, it remains the deadliest terrorist attack in human history and the single deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement in the history of the United States, with 340 firefighters and 72 police killed. Numerous memorials have been constructed, including a National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York City, the Pentagon Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, and the Flight 93 National Memorial at the Pennsylvania crash site. If you're in America, especially on the East Coast, a lot of people that I know at least knew somebody or a family member, whatever, that was in it. So I don't know, it's pretty crazy, especially when you like around it. Shit just hits home, you know what I mean? So. And we're moving on to the second tier, so let's get to it. All right, so first up on the second tier of the iceberg is the Pompeii volcano eruption. All right, so basically the actual volcano of Pompeii is called Mount Vesuvius. It's a stratovolcano. It's in southern Italy, and basically Pompeii is its most famous eruption. Pompeii is technically a city, okay? Basically, the most famous eruption of this Mount Vesuvius volcano is in 79 AD, which was one of the deadliest in European history. It is arguably one of the most famous volcanic eruptions throughout all of human history. Basically, in the autumn of 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius violently spewed forth a deadly cloud of superheated tephra and gases to the height of 21 miles in the air. So basically, this shit shot out molten lava, ash, smoke, all that shit, 21 miles up into the air, super high, okay? It shot out at about 1.5 million tons per second, ultimately releasing 100,000 times the thermal energy of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Basically, at the time, the region was part of the Roman Empire. So Pompeii was part of this big Roman Empire. And basically, after the explosion, several Roman cities were obliterated and buried underneath massive pyroclastic surges and asphalt deposits. So all this ash started raining down on these cities and basically covered them completely. And basically, it like froze these people, you know what I mean? It froze them in like whatever position they were in. It's crazy. There's people holding hands, there's people hugging. Like, sad to see, man. Like, no bullshit, it's sad to see. After archaeological excavations revealed much about the lives of the inhabitants, the area became a major tourist attraction and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and part of the Vesuvius National Park. The population of both cities was over 20,000, and the remains of over 1,500 people have been found at Pompeii and Herculaneum so far, although the total death toll from the eruption remains unknown to this day. Yeah, man, Pompeii was crazy because like they still don't really know much. We just basically have to guess off of what we can find from digging into it. So, hey, man, who knows? But we're moving on to the next one, so let's get it. Up next on this is the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and basically at 5:12 a.m. on Wednesday, April 18th, 1906, the coast of Northern California was struck by a major earthquake with an estimated magnitude of 7.9, which is fucking crazy because I'm pretty sure it only goes up to 10, right? I don't even hear about a lot of shit. Most of the ones I hear about are like 4s, 5s. High intensity shaking was felt from Eureka on the north coast to the Salinas Valley, an agricultural region to the south of San Francisco Bay. Devastating fires soon broke out in the city and lasted for several days. More than 3,000 people died and over 80% of the city of San Francisco was destroyed. The events are remembered as one of the worst and most deadly earthquakes in the history of the United States. The death toll remains as the greatest loss of life from a natural disaster in California's history and high on the list of American disasters. Anyways, third up on this tier, second tier, whatever, is the Spanish flu pandemic. And this one is basically, so if the Black Plague is up here, Spanish flu is right here, all right? It's the second list, you know what I mean? The 1918 influenza pandemic, also known as the Misomner Spanish flu or the Great Influenza Epidemic, was an exceptionally deadly global influenza pandemic caused by the H1N1 influenza A virus. The earliest documented case was March 1918 in Kansas, United States, with further cases recorded in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom in April. 2 years later, nearly a third of the global population, or an estimated 500 million people, had been infected in 4 successive waves. Estimates of death range from 17 million to 50 million, and possibly as high as 100 million people, making it the second deadliest pandemic in human history, right below the Black Plague, like I said. The pandemic broke out near the end of World War I when wartime censors suppressed bad news in the belligerent countries to maintain morale. So basically nobody knows where it started and nobody knows how it really spread at first, because there was actually no data doing it, you know, and people were just kind of suppressing it like, oh, it's not even a big deal. And basically the 1918 Spanish flu was one of the first flu pandemics caused by the H1N1 influenza A virus. The most recent one was in 2009 with the swine flu. And I remember that. I think I was in like elementary school, maybe early middle school. So I remember that shit, but that wasn't even like a big of a deal. We already had medicine for it then. So all right, so we finishing up the second tier with a really recent one, to be honest. The Australian bushfires of 2019. So from 2019 to 2020, the Australian bushfire season, also known as Black Summer, was a period of bushfires in many parts of Australia, which, due to its unusual intensity, size, duration, and uncontrollable dimension, it is considered a megafire. In June 2019, the Queensland Fire and Emergency Service Acting Director warned of a potential early start to the bushfire season, which normally starts in August. The warnings was based on the Northern Australia bushfire seasonal outlook, noting exceptional dry conditions and a lack of soil moisture. Combined with early fires in central Queensland, throughout the summer, hundreds of fires burnt, mainly in the southeast of the country, and then major fires peaked during December through January kind of thing. As of the 28th of October 2020, the fires burnt an estimated 24.3 through 33.8 million hectares, which is about 60 to 84 million acres of land, all right? Destroyed over 6,000 buildings, including 3,000 homes, and killed at least 34 people. Economists estimated that the Australian bushfires may cost an estimated 103 billion in property damage and economic losses, making the bushfires Australia's costliest natural disaster to date. And nearly 80% of all Australians were affected either directly or indirectly by these bushfires. I don't know how it really started, but I know a lot of like the California fires they start with people, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Just fucking idiots, like dog. All right, so starting off tier 3 is the Irish potato famine, also known as the Great Hunger, was a period of mass starvation and disease in Ireland from 1845 to 1852, with the most severely affected areas in the west and south of Ireland. The Irish themselves, they called this whole event Drogshall. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Drogshall is how it looks, to be honest with you, but it loosely translates to hard times, or literally the bad life. The worst year of this whole period was the period of 1847, also known as the Black 47. During the Great Hunger, about 1 million people died and more than 1 million people fled the country, causing the country's population to fall by an estimated 20 to 25%. In some towns, falling as much as 67% between 1841 and 1871. Between 1845 and 1855, no fewer than 2.1 million people left Ireland, primarily on packet ships, but also steamboats. It's considered one of the greatest exoduses, basically, which is when people just massively start leaving the country in like droves, I guess. And basically, it's called one of the greatest exoduses from a single island in all of history, because all these people started leaving Ireland because there was no food. The approximate cause of the famine was a potato blight, which infected potato crops throughout East Europe in the 1840s, causing an additional 100,000 deaths outside of Ireland and influencing much of the unrest in the widespread European revolutions in 1848. And basically the reason why it was like so bad of an event was because Ireland's main crop that they grew was potatoes, you know what I mean? That was like their home export, I guess. They didn't really focus too much on other plants or other vegetables or whatever you want to call it, you know what I mean? They weren't really growing anything else. They were just growing potatoes because that's what they were known for. They already knew how to do it. They was just doing it. So when this thing hit and ruined all the potatoes, it fucking basically ruined a lot of the food for a majority of people, which is why so many people starved to death. All right, so up next is the Alaskan wildfires of 2004. So basically, the 2004 Alaska fire season was the worst wildfire season on record in the U.S. state of Alaska in terms of area burned. Although the 1989 fire season recorded more fires, nearly 1,000, the 2004 season burned more than 6,600,000 acres in just 701 fires. The largest of these fires was in the Taylor Complex fire. This fire consumed over 1.7 million acres and was deemed to be the largest fire in the United States from at least 1997 to 2019. Out of all 701 fires, 426 fires were started by humans and 215 were started by lightning. Anyways, we moving on. That one was a short one. It didn't really have too much information, so let's get to the next. All right, so up next on this list is the Halifax explosion. The Halifax explosion was a disaster that occurred in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. All right, on the morning of December 6, 1917, the SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship laden with high explosives, collided with a Norwegian vessel, SS Imo, in the Narrows, a strait connecting the upper Halifax harbor to the Bedford Basin. A fire on board the Mont Blanc led to a massive explosion that devastated the Richmond district of Halifax. 1,782 people were killed, largely in Halifax and Dartmouth, by the blast, debris, fires, and collapsed building, and an estimated 9,000 others were injured. All right, the blast was the largest human-made explosion at the time. Get that straight. Releasing the equivalent energy of roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT. Nearly all structures within a half-mile radius, including the community of Richmond, were obliterated. So if you was within a half mile of this fucking explosion, cuz your whole shit was gone. Like off the map type shit, gone. You feel me? So that's fucked. The pressure wave snapped trees, it bent iron rails, demolished buildings, it grounded vessels, including the IMO, which was washed ashore by the ensuing tsunami, and scattered fragments of the Mont Blanc for kilometers, which is like miles in US, you know what I mean? Across the harbor in Dartmouth, there was also widespread damage because a tsunami created by the blast wiped out the community of the Micmac. Next thing. All right, so up next is the 1883 Krakatoa eruption. So basically, the eruption started in the Sudan Strait, began on May 20th of 1883 and peaked on the late morning of Monday, August 27th, 1883, when over 70% of the island of Krakatoa and its surrounding archipelago, so much of the islands surrounding it, were destroyed as it collapsed into a caldera. Basically, the eruption was one of the deadliest and most destructive volcanic events in recorded history. The explosion was heard almost 2,000 miles away in Perth, Western Australia, and Rodrigues near Mauritius, which is over 3,000 miles away. So the sound was heard all over the fucking world, all right? It was actually heard in up to 50 different locations around the world, and the sound wave is recorded to travel the globe 7 times. So yo, the sound wave from this thing, boom, 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 went around. Like, everybody heard this thing, all right? At least 36,417 deaths are attributed to this eruption and the tsunami it created. So pretty crazy. I didn't find much information on it, so I basically gave everything I found on it. But all right, so up next are the Boston Marathon bombings. And basically, bro, I'm from Boston, you know what I mean? I'm a Boston baby, so this shit is like super close to home. I remember this, bro. I remember watching this shit on the news. Damn, that shit's wild. But anyways, let me read this thing off to y'all. So basically, the Boston Marathon bombing was a domestic terrorist attack that took place during the annual Boston Marathon on April 15th, 2013. Yeah, see, that shit wasn't even that long ago, bro. Not even 10 years. Like, sheesh. 2 terrorists and brothers, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and Tamerlan Tsarnaev, planted 2 homemade pressure cooker bombs, which detonated 14 seconds and 210 yards apart at 2:49 p.m. near the finish line of the race. It killed 3 people and it injured hundreds, all right? 17 of the people that were injured, they lost limbs. Like, 3 days later, the FBI released images of the 2 suspects, which are these guys, all right? There were 2 brothers, all right? Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Following the identification of the suspect, they killed an MIT police officer. Basically, the brother got approached. They kidnapped the man in his car and had a shootout with police in the nearby Watertown, during which 2 police officers were severely injured, one of whom, DJ Simmons, died a year later. Tamerlan was shot several times, and basically Tamerlan died.
The younger Tsarnaev, now back in the Mercedes, runs over his brother, just missing Pugliese.
And I'm laying there and I saw the front wheels go over Tamerlan. I saw him bounce up and underneath the undercarriage a couple of times. I saw him get hung up in the rear wheels and get dragged 20-25 feet.
Tamerlan died soon after, and basically an unprecedented manhunt started for this dude, Dzhokhar, whatever his name was, all right? And basically people were looking for him for about a week, I think like a few days at least. He was running all over this Watertown thing, and I remember he got caught up in some dude's backyard because this dude fucking laid in his boat, all right? He like was chilling in this dude's boat that he had in his backyard. And basically the dude heard the fucking noises, you know what I mean? Seen the blood going into his boat, and he was like, yo, cuz, what the fuck? Called the police, and basically they had a big shootout, and he was shot, wounded, and now he's being held at ADX Federal Supermax. All right, so up next on this tier is the Great Smog of London. The Great Smog of London, or known as the Great Smog of 1952, was a severe air pollution event that affected London, England in December 1952. A period of unusually cold weather combined with an anticyclone and windless conditions collected airborne pollutants, mostly arising from the use of coal to form a thick layer of smog over the city. So if you can imagine in your head, basically there's no wind going around. It's kind of like just dry and dead, and all of this smog from the burning of these coals was just filling up the air, almost like a fog, you know what I mean? But smog, because it's dirty. It lasted from Friday, December 5th to Tuesday, December 9th, 1952. Then it dispersed quickly when the weather changed. So exactly, basically it was just stagnant weather. So it was just sitting around in the city. And then once it finally started to rain out, it kind of all dissipated and just moved away. The smog caused major disruption by reducing visibility and even penetrating indoor areas. Government medical reports in the weeks following estimated that up to 4,000 people died as a direct result of the smog, and 100,000 more were made ill by the smog's events on the human respiratory system. More recent research suggests that the total number of fatalities should have been considered way higher, with estimates ranging from 10,000 to 12,000 deaths. And basically this whole event led to major changes in regulations, including the Clean Air Act of 1956. So I guess it ended somewhat well, you know what I mean? They cleaned up the air and they set in some policies so that this shit didn't happen again. But yeah, man, like what the fuck? Like that shit, I don't know. I never heard of this before, to be honest with you. Let me know if you guys had heard about this before, but until I was looking this stuff up, I never even heard about this. So anyways, we're moving on to the next thing. Up next is the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. This was another one that I didn't think I had ever heard of. Maybe I learned about it once, but not well enough for me to remember. So the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster was a fatal incident in the United States space program that occurred on February 1st, 2003, when the Space Shuttle Columbia, or OV-102, disintegrated as it re-entered the atmosphere, killing all 7 crew members. The disaster was the second fatal accident in the Space Shuttle program after the 1986 breakup of the Challenger soon after liftoff. Alright, so during the STS-107 launch, a piece of insulation foam broke off the Space Shuttle external tank and struck the thermal protection systems tiles on the orbiter's left wing. Similar foam shedding had occurred during previous events and basically caused damage from like minor to nearly catastrophic. So there's really no way to tell how bad it's going to be until it happens. You know what I mean? Because it has gone and it's done almost no damage, or it's gone and done like some crazy damage. This shit happening. But basically, some engineers suspected that the damage to the Columbia was more serious. Before re-entry, NASA managers had limited the investigation, reasoning that the crew could not have fixed the problem if it had been confirmed. So basically, they just said, dude, even if it is done, like if it is, like, they can't really do anything about it. So when the Columbia re-entered the atmosphere of Earth, damage allowed hot atmospheric gases to penetrate the heat shield, destroying the internal wind structure, which caused the orbiter to become unstable and completely break apart. So, all right, so finishing up this tier and this video, this part of the video, I guess, is the Church of the Company fire. Okay, so the Church of the Society fire, is more commonly as it's known, started on December 8th of 1863. It is the largest fire to have ever been recorded in the city of Santiago, Chile. Basically, how it started is the Church of the Society of Jesus. It was a Christian kind of church in downtown Santiago, and the day of the fire, they were celebrating the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which is, I guess, one of the most popular festivities of the religious calendar. And the temple was adorned with a profusion of candles, oil lamps, wall coverings, all this shit. You know what I mean? They went all out. They was decorating this place, trying to make it look nice. You get it. Basically, in the main altar, a large statue of the Virgin Mary was standing over this half moon that itself was this big caldera, so it had a flame in it and everything. And basically, the night that the fire started, it started right before 7 p.m. when an oil lamp on the top of the main altar ignited some of the veils that adorn the walls, so it lit up some of these wall coverings. And a big design, basically a big reason why a lot of people died in this fire, is because of the doors and the design of the actual building. The doors, instead of opening wide, like open, they closed. You know what I mean? You know those pull doors where you go and push it out and you're like, fuck, I gotta pull it? Basically, that was their whole situation. So a big gust of wind came, blew the doors open, and it knocked over this candle, which ended up lighting more stuff on fire, and it disrupted this meeting of all these worshiping people. And basically, the fire started by this burning candle. It roared through the whole church, which destroyed the entire thing. And all these people that were trying to escape, they were all packing on the doors, so they weren't able to actually open the doors because everybody, you know what I mean, body is in the way. You can't open it up if you got to pull it open, and everybody else is trying to beat on the doors to get it down. So basically, these people all trapped themselves, and that is just a fucked up situation, my boy. More than 2,500 people died in this fire. It estimated around 25 to 3,000 people actually died. And it's just crazy to think, man. Like, they all got trapped. Just crazy shit, bro. You know what I mean? RIP to them. That's crazy. Hey, I don't know. I mean, you won't catch me in the church for that reason, because I don't know. But anyways, man, if y'all watched the whole thing, I appreciate it. Even if you didn't, if you just watched a little piece of this and you probably didn't get to see this message, I appreciate it. Anybody that's subscribing, you real as fuck. Like, crazy, bro. I'm almost at 100 subscribers. I just started this shit in like end of February, some type of thing like that. So I don't know, I appreciate y'all for real. Like, that shit's crazy to me. And yeah, other than that, man, free the guys, get laid. I'll catch y'all later. Deuces.